Hello. We are gathering today a group of leaders from Zion Lutheran Church in Worcester, your brothers and sisters in Christ, who each have something to particularly contribute to this conversation. We know that as we put out the reentry plan and as we're continuing to have to edit it and tweak it and try to listen to things that are still going on, that it could be helpful for folks to get to hear a little bit of the thinking that went into that plan and some of the things that are the considerations for when and how Zion will be able to return to in-person worship opportunities. I'm Pastor Sherry Ayers. I'm the interim at Zion, and I am going to share a little image that I thought was worth sharing and a prayer here this morning before we get started, or this morning when we're recording. This is a picture of the stained glass windows that are internal to the congregation, to the building at Zion. And what I thought was important about this photo is I think a lot of us are feeling simultaneously grateful for the opportunity to gather on Zoom or to watch the videos on YouTube. We're aware that it's imperfect and it doesn't feel the same, but we're still grateful for that opportunity to see one another and to be with one another in some way. And it made me think of the fact that we often think in the church of the stained glass windows when we see them from the outside or the inside of a building as the communication of the church with the world, right? You know, light shines in or light shines out, and those images help to share usually the message of the biblical story of God intervening on behalf of creation and of the redemptive love of Jesus Christ. And those are the things that we share with the larger community, often by some of those windows in those classic gold buildings. But one of the things I love is the fact that at Zion, and I know there are sort of historical reasons why this is the case, but at Zion there are internal stained glass windows as well. And I feel like this particular video and all the work that we've been doing has been also trying, we want to continue to be a congregation that expresses love for neighbor and for the community. But we also know that we're trying to kind of raise up a community within to be thinking through these things. And so I feel like we have had some glimpses of that in some ways. And I think the four Zion leaders that are on this call that are going to be sharing some ideas this morning with their brothers and sisters in Christ are kind of these internal stained glass windows. The love and grace and knowledge of God is shining through all of you, the four of you on this call, and the larger community as well. So I thought I would begin with a prayer from the ELW for teachers, of which the four of you and so many others are helping us to kind of learn how we can live alongside this very challenging virus in these times. So let us pray. God of wisdom, your Son came among us as a teacher. Send your blessing on all who are engaged in the work of education. Give them clearness of vision and freshness of thought, and enable them so to train the hearts and minds of their students and of all of us, that they may grow in wisdom and be prepared to face the challenges of life. Through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
And I believe that really is a great prayer for this helping one another to live and to thrive in these days. So thank you all for being willing to hop on a Zoom call and do this and record it for the good of the larger community. So let's just start by maybe some introductions. I suspect many folks are gonna know everybody on this call, but just in case, maybe a little bit of an introduction to who you are, your kind of the time that you've been at Zion maybe, but also kind of what brings you to this particular moment. Like what kind of a background do you bring and commitment to this educational moment today?
I'm Kathy Ream, and I'm a registered nurse. Ron and I have been members of Zion since 1979 when we moved to Worcester and raised two girls there. I am one of the parish nurses, and one of the reasons that Becky and I are on this call is because we realize that a lot of people are getting a lot of conflicting information about coronavirus or COVID. And we just wanted to try and give some facts and hopefully make people understand it a little bit better and realize that things are changing on a daily basis. So what we say today may be out of fashion in a week or two. So.
Great. Yeah.
I'm Becky Thornton. I'm an RN also. I'm one of the parish nurses with Kathy. And I was asked to join this group to help share information as well as share what has happened in our personal life.
I'm Daphne Dexter, and along with Jeff, we are parish musicians at Zion, and we've been there since 1993 in various capacities as parishioners as well as staff members. And we're here to talk today about decisions that have been made for the reentry process and how it affects worshiping together, share some of the materials that we have read to lead us to decisions in the best interest of Zion, of when we come back to worship together and what that's about.
Good morning. As Daphne introduced me, my name is Jeffrey Dexter. I'm one of the co-parish musicians at Zion Lutheran Church, and excited to be on this call today for a couple of reasons. Daphne and I have raised two wonderful young women, so I'm totally at home with a group of four ladies in a conference call about this topic. We've been doing a lot of work internally at Zion with our reentry committee about answering these questions that are really a challenge to deal with, and some things that really help as we're moving forward. And we're anxious today to just have a conversation and provide some information for you, as Kathy said in her introduction. And we look forward to the ways in which this might help the church as we move forward together.
Thank you all so much. It's great to gather together, and it's great to have this opportunity. As I mentioned before, I'm the interim pastor at Zion, and my role on this call, although I've been a part of the reentry team meetings, but my role on this call is primarily just to help ask the questions and facilitate the discussion and let all of these wise ones help to give us the information that we're looking for. So we're glad that you've found the video to have a little bit of conversation and to hear a little bit of this conversation for the good of Zion and for our larger community. So let's start. Becky, you mentioned in your introduction that you have both a professional nursing interest and commitment to this topic, but that there's a personal family connection as well. Do you want to say a little bit about your family's personal connection to COVID-19?
Sure. Back in March, Steve and I attended a Lions convention right as COVID was being recognized. And there were 35 to 40 people there. And we had all the safety precautions in line, everything. Within 1 to 2 weeks, we got notified that someone had the coronavirus. And we thought, okay, well, we'll just self-quarantine. Within 2 weeks of that, Steve started getting sick. We both did, actually. But very rapidly, he became very tired, lost his sense of taste, had major respiratory issues, and he was going downhill pretty fast. So when his pulse oximeter reading, which is your oxygen level, was abnormal consistently, I called Kathy. Anyhow, call the squad. So I did. And he spent 6 days in the hospital, struggling with keeping his oxygen level up. It would go up, it would go down. And then another 14 days at home and in quarantine, but it took him a good 3 to 4 weeks to get back to normal.
Okay. Is he feeling pretty back to normal now? And is he fine?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So can I ask a question? When he was in the hospital, they were obviously testing him, right? But am I correct that at least in the early days of March, testing was such that you didn't get tested? Is that right?
Correct.
But would your recommendation, it seems to me that now the recommendation that we're hearing really is for folks with symptoms, now there's sufficient testing capabilities that people should go and get tested if they're experiencing those kinds of symptoms. Well, actually, they should get the healthcare they need. But in addition to that, someone in your condition maybe would still have gotten tested if that happened in July.
Correct.
Is that right? Okay. All right. I'm sure that was a very scary time, especially when you get that. What did you think when you got that call about, before you had the symptoms, but just when you knew that you had been exposed, when this was so new?
Well, we became a little nervous.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there were 8 people at that convention that contracted it.
Yeah.
1 died,
Hmm.
2 ended up on ventilators for a long period of time.
Wow.
The other 2 were admitted, and the rest of us stayed at home. So it happened very quickly, and it was rampant.
Yeah. And that's a pretty high percentage from the number of people that you said were there. And especially if they were also, there were some precautions in place. Of course, early March precautions, we were still learning as little as we know now. We knew so much less then. So that's very scary and sad for a group of that size. Kathy, so you were the consulting nurse on that particular story, but maybe you can also say a little bit about kind of the kinds of things that put people especially at risk, or anything else just about that kind of contagious element to it, and the concerns that you might see as well.
Well, one of the things was that I went to the CDC to ask or to check out exactly who is a high-risk patient. And basically anybody with a chronic disease. They listed chronic lung disease, heart disease with congestive heart failure, which a fair number of older people have, chronic kidney disease, chronic liver disease, a weakened immune system, someone that has been on chemotherapy for cancer, anyone who has had a transplant and is on immunosuppressive drugs, sickle cell anemia. They listed neurological conditions and dementia like Alzheimer's. And one of the things that, as we've been reading, we're finding is that it really can make dementia much worse. Smokers are at high risk, and diabetes. And one of the things that people may not be aware of is that women who are pregnant may be at higher risk. And part of that is, if anyone has been reading, there is a higher incidence of blood clots with patients, some patients with COVID. And because of that, they have been seeing it in pregnant patients. So women who are very young have been having blood clots. Some of them have had strokes. Wow. So that's something to think about. If you are high risk, if you have any of those things, or if you have a family member or you're a caregiver of someone with any of those conditions. The other thing that you need to think about is, one of the things that's very clear right now is outdoor activities are much safer than indoor activities. And there was one article on NPR, National Public Radio, that talked about the risk of different activities, and they graded them on a scale from 0 to 10. 0 being no risk, 10 being the highest risk, and going to a church service rated an 8. So that's another thing to think about, is that going to church with a group of people is a high risk activity. Mm-hmm. Another thing to think about is, you may be sitting next to someone who has no cough, no shortness of breath. They may be totally asymptomatic, and they may be positive for coronavirus, and they can give it to you. One of the things that I wanted to talk about with my specific family is, I won't be returning to church for a very long time when we start in-person worship. And one of the reasons being is that many people at Zion know that my husband, Ron, had a stroke when he was 43 years old, and it affected him with right-sided weakness. He has no use of his right arm and right hand. We are being very careful with social distancing and all of the precautions that we can possibly take. I'm being as careful as he is because I don't want to bring it home to him. Because of the fact that people have a higher incidence of blood clots and strokes, the last thing we want is for that to occur with him. He also has diabetes, and he's also 70 years old. So he is a very high risk patient. So probably I won't be returning to church in person until after they have a vaccine.
You know, Mitch, I love the way you talk about the fact that it's both your own risk, right? And the people in your family, the folks that are at risk. And I mean, I think we really would hope that everyone at Zion is thinking through that same process that you just described, right? So to think through their own particular set of risks and the people in what my spouse likes to call their germ sphere, right? You know, like the people in their tribe, in their home that may also be put at risk. And I would add that if you spin that out a little bit, you know, being a part of the reentry conversations, which a couple of you have been on, or several of you have been on, I think that's also the thing that is making us be extremely cautious and wanting to take our time and figure out ways to do this in the safest way possible and not any sooner than we feel like we can do that, because everything you just described and what we want people to be thinking for their own families, we are also thinking for the Zion family, right? You know, the people who are at risk. And that exact same thinking process has applied as we've been thinking this through on behalf of the whole congregation. So that's a great example.
The other thing that they need to think about is what I think about is I am, in essence, even though Ron is a very capable person and does most of the stuff on his own, I do some daily tasks for him. If I get sick, even if I don't give it to him, who is going to take care of him? We have two daughters who live in the Washington, D.C. area. One has a 1-year-old child. The other one has asthma that she's been having problems with. The last thing I want to do is ask them to have to come here and take care of them. Plus, they're both working full time at home. So, but you just have to, if you have a 93-year-old mother that relies on you, even if she's not living in the same home, who's going to take care of her if you would get it? Those are the types of things they need to think about.
Yeah, that's great. So I think that leans into this kind of the thinking of the reentry team, and like, you know, this description is a little microcosm of what that team, you know, that team met weekly for about 6 weeks and now is continuing to meet, but not quite as frequently. And I think you've honed into the fact that, you know, every time we thought we sort of had thought of all the, then like, what about those pieces? And every time you think you've got your hands on that, then it was like, what about that next thing that comes out? Jeff or Daphne, you were also on that team. Do either one of you want to say a little bit about just how the reentry team thought through these things, some of the resources that were involved?
I'd say one of the things that I think about the reentry team and our work, and as listening to Becky and Kathy talk about this, is that Zion Lutheran Church, the larger picture of Zion Lutheran Church, and I like Pastor Sherry's word, microcosm. Zion Lutheran Church is a poster child for the people who could be affected by this particular virus. If you look at our demographics, if you look at the people who are active in the life of our parish, that's what I think concerned me about more than any other one individual thing, is that, wow, we could be, by gathering together, we could be putting a lot of people at risk, and a lot of the people that we care about and love and have served for decades. And there's just no good reason to do that if you don't have to. There just simply isn't. And as much as we enjoy being in one another's company and we feed on one another in the context of corporate worship, it was absolutely abundantly clear, at least to me, and I think to most everybody else in the reentry team, that this is something that we have to be very, very careful and extremely deliberate about. If we're going to err on any side, one way or the other, it'd be way better to err on the side of conservancy and not gather together until there is some sort of vaccine, or until this pandemic has been completely wiped out.
Right.
And from our perspective here, even though these days seem so much brighter than those days in March and April, we've got a ways to go, I think, before we're to the point where you can really say, oh, this is no longer a public health concern. And so that's the kinds of things that guided our discussions, and just everything from the mundane to the very, very specific things that we've talked about how can we be safe? How can our building be safe? How can we be concerned how can we continue our concern for other persons and help them and serve them at the same time, taking into account that we've got to be mindful of our individual health, the health of our family members and the people who we cohabitate with, and our fellow parishioners. And so that's been a huge part of this process.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say that thank you to Daphne. We have a list of some of the many resources that team considered because of all those questions, Jeff, that you just mentioned, and all that big. It was a big set of questions, and several of us mentioned that, like, initially it was really overwhelming to try to gather in all that information. But we are going to put up a list of some of those resources that helped in that process. So thank you, Jeff, for bringing those up, and Daphne for putting that together. I think that will help others see some of those resources and the way we were sort of weighing some of those resources. Daphne, did you have anything else to add about any of the resources, or do you want to start to talk about some of the things that we've started to think about, the challenges of in-person worship?
I also wanted to add to what Jeff said about the reentry team. We were very fortunate to have the variety of people involved in those discussions. I was thankful when Kathy joined us and we had the medical advice coming in to us, and when Joel Bender joined us and we had it from an insurance perspective of what we were looking at. But it's been very helpful to have so many people involved in those discussions so that we all are lending this advice to what is best for Zion.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Yes, it was a great, there were staff members, there were folks with different types of expertise, and there were some connections to council. It was a great group of people. So I yes, yes to all that. I wonder about, the re-entry plan that team came up with and that then was approved by council, that's out now, it's on the web, it went out in the voicemailing. I think, and part of what we want to do with this conversation is to speak to those. I mean, there are going to be we did a survey, and so we heard from very many people, Kathy, like yourself, who have said, either for my own personal risk factors or those in my household or the implications that would have, I am not willing to return to in-person worship until we are at a vaccine or a very successful treatment plan, something that we can trust will return to wholeness most of the people who are unlucky enough to contract the virus. We also, of course, have some folks who are in a different space on that, and who maybe looked at that plan and felt like, oh my gosh, do we have to do all of these things, or all of these things that we really truly have to do to make this change? Maybe Kathy or Daphne or Jeff, do you want to talk a little bit maybe about, and maybe Daphne and Jeff could start, about some of the choices that were made about in-person worship, and then maybe Kathy could also talk a little bit about why some of those things are so important from a safety precaution area. So what are the things, if someone, I mean, we are not yet setting a date. We are thinking this is going to be several weeks yet down the road, maybe a couple months down the road, when we don't know when we will actually get into the building again. But do you want to say a little bit about what I might, if I'm coming to worship and I just only casually read that reentry document, what might I find when I show up for worship that day?
I think you're going to find one of the things that, as we put this plan together and started talking together about what this means and how can we be safe and how could we do this, I think one of the things you're going to find that if you are a frequenter of worship at Zion Lutheran Church, or if you're a frequenter of liturgical worship in any of its forms throughout the country with our partners in common communion throughout the denominational relationships in the United States, you would find that worship is going to be vastly, vastly different. Mostly because, especially in the Lutheran tradition, there's a great history and a great preponderance of using music and worship as part of that sort of worship experience. And one of the things that we have learned in this process, and one of the things that we have learned as this disease has evolved, is that one of the very most riskiest behaviors you can engage in is singing. And singing is so central to how we express ourselves as Lutheran Christians that you think, my goodness, if we can't sing, is there even a reason to come to church? And while that is certainly a valid viewpoint, it's one of the things that we really had to struggle with as we started to talk about how is this going to work? How can we do this? Singing is not going to be allowed, and we can talk a little bit about why it's not going to be allowed. And things like communal reading, reading of scripture together in unison, either the intoning or the reading of psalms, for instance. Back and forth liturgy between a lector and a congregation is not something that's particularly healthy at this point. So we had to try and reimagine worship within those strictures. And that's something that we're still doing right now. We're still working at that and trying to go, okay, how is this going to take form, or why is this going to take form? There's the entire element, again, in the liturgical tradition, and certainly in Zion for the past 20 years or so, we've been a congregation that has been all Eucharist all the time. And we look forward to that weekly celebration and that weekly gift. And that's something right now too that we can't do. So you're starting to add up some pretty significant mileposts and markers of liturgical Lutheran worship, and none of those are particularly advised at the moment. So we're trying to work through what does that mean, and how to be a worshiping community without those particular elements at the present time.
Yeah, I think that is going to really make things feel unfamiliar. In a sense, what I hope people are considering before coming to our return to in-person worship is it would be a false dichotomy to say that there is the unfamiliarity of Zoom worship, wonderful in many ways, challenges in some ways, but still unfamiliar, and the back to normal, right? Those are not the two things that we're comparing. We're comparing some unfamiliar, awkward elements of online worship and some unfamiliar, awkward elements of in-person worship, but it would be similarly challenging in some ways, as you've highlighted. I have the screen up, Daphne, that you, one of the ones that you sort of helped us to think about. And I have to say, as a brass player, tell me why anyone who blows air through an instrument is also a challenge. And Daphne, maybe you can address that, or Kathy also maybe start to talk about some of those aerosol and droplet questions, types of things.
Speaking and singing emits aerosols, and the aerosols are what we hear most about of how COVID is spread. The slide that follows this one tells about how speaking releases 2 to 10 times as many particles as a single cough. And we're probably all a little nervous when we hear someone coughing these days, and we think, oh my, what if they have, the virus? But speaking, when you think of that, releases even more particles than that single cough. Singing also even more, and that's sustained, so that's why we're not doing that. Wind instruments, you blow a lot of air, and one of the worst ones that they tell us is playing a flute or a piccolo. And therefore, wind instruments are not being advised either, only percussion type instruments or strings to be used for creating music. So that's piano, organ, guitar, but not any kind of wind instrument. It's not safe.
Yeah.
I will say too, as an aside to that, and we get a question. My day job, of course, is with the Shantz Organ Company. We build pipe organs, primarily for churches, for educational institutions. And we've fielded a number of questions from people, clients and potential clients saying, well, wouldn't using a pipe organ be a very dangerous thing in COVID times? And while you might think a fairly substantial pipe organ playing full out does use wind in order to create its sound, but it does not transmit aerosol droplets like its brothers and sisters in the woodwind and brass family do, because it takes its air from a central location, which is quite often usually remote from the church itself. So it's the air that the pipe organ is using is not coming from the room in which people are gathered, and it doesn't spray aerosol like a wind instrument, like a flute or a trumpet would.
Yeah. That you've leaned a little bit into the question of where the air comes from and how it gets exchanged in the space. Speaking about the organ, speaking about other instruments, and we've already spoken about singing and speaking. Kathy, do you want to say just anything else about other, maybe not the musical, but the other elements that would be really different in coming together for worship in person, and why we've thought about those things?
Well, one of the things I wanted to elaborate just a little bit more on the aerosolization that happens. I was trying to figure out how to explain it to the congregation, and what came to mind was fog, how fog just lingers in the air. That's how the very tiny particles of aerosols, when we speak and sing and shout and talk, they just hang in the air, and they hang in the air for a length of time. And I found a great article by one of the leading epidemiologists, and there's two quotes I actually want to read. He said, "When you and I talk, we fill a room full of aerosols. If you actually had a special camera, which actually does exist, and you can do this, you can actually see aerosols fill the room, and these little particles after just 20 to 30 minutes of talking." And then another thing says, if you're in a building where the heating, ventilation, and cooling system is not moving air very frequently, then that aerosol that person is breathing in that room is going to build up over time. And yes, you are going to be at a much greater risk in that setting. So because of that, one of the things that the scenario of what's going to happen when you come to in-person worship is, when you're outside the church, you will be asked questions to make sure you're not running a fever, you don't feel ill, you don't have a cough and shortness of breath, you haven't been around anyone very recently that is positive for COVID. You will put on a mask, and we will not allow anyone in the church without a mask, because masks have been one of the greatest blocks to preventions from giving COVID to anyone, and for protecting yourself. Good job, Jeff. You will come in with your mask on, no congregating in room 200 in groups like we're used to doing. I mean, we love these people in our congregation. We love seeing them on Sunday morning. We want to talk. That's not going to happen. You will go to your seat, and Daphne's worked very hard at figuring out where those seats will be to be socially distanced. You will sit down with your mask on, and you will not talk, you won't sing, you won't say the Lord's Prayer. There won't necessarily be an offering. So, it's just going to be you sitting there watching the things that occur. So, and that is a protection to everyone. We don't want people moving about, because as people move around, they will move those aerosol particles, which would increase the risk. To open all of the windows in the church and let the fresh air in from outside would lower the risk, but we can't do that because our organ needs to have a stable atmosphere at all times. So, you just have to understand when you come that there is going to be a risk and that it's going to be a different worship.
Yeah. I want to just say that Daphne has a 6-foot stick and she's not afraid to use it to measure out where people can stand and sit. And she may speak softly, but she carries that 6-foot stick, and it's going to have an impact on where you get to be in the building when you come in for worship. So absolutely. I think, I'm really glad to be doing this to help people kind of set their expectations around the question of in-person worship. It's going to come with its own challenges for sure.
I would also add that when people enter the church, when Kathy was talking about that, it won't be normal that way either. When you actually enter the sanctuary, it will be one family unit at a time being escorted to a seat, not of your choice, because we would fill it from the Market Street windows back toward the room 200 windows to just keep everyone properly distanced. So that's one of the many challenges.
Right. I also want to throw in, if you've heard us talking a lot about the use of the sanctuary, and one of the reasons that we are using only that space is because as hard as all of these things were to consider in that large, high-ceilinged, expansive space, they were virtually impossible in room 100, where you don't have the ability, the ceiling is not as high, the walls are not as far away from one another, and to get people at a necessary, and there's no external windowed walls, right? Even harder there. And the same thing would be true maybe in some other places in the building. But I just want to highlight that. So I think a couple of us have heard this question, but I'm just going to ask it out directly, maybe to the whole group. There are going to be people, we have heard people say, well, if this is what worship is going to be like in person, should we do it at all? Right? What do you guys say to some of that question about whether or not?
Becky asked me that question yesterday when we were discussing this. And, I do wonder, honestly, I really like the Zoom worship. You get to see everybody, you get to talk, you get to sing while everyone's muted, so you can sing out loud and sing out strong and no one hears you.
That's right.
So, I enjoy that, and I enjoy that more than if I would go to church and just sit there. Boy, that's going to be difficult.
Yeah.
To not want to say the Lord's Prayer or the Apostles' Creed, or if Jeff plays music, not want to sing out to it. So.
Yeah, Daphne, I think you've heard that from other people too, haven't you? That people asking.
I actually, of people not a part of the Zion family, but neighbors who attend other churches in the area, and they have gone back to in-person worship. And when they got there and realized there was no singing and there was no communal speaking, the quote was, "Why didn't we just stay on our online worship?" And I said, that's exactly what we're thinking right now.
That's why we're wrestling. It's hard to decide. Yeah, Jeff.
I'll tell you from my perspective, those who know me well and who've known my professional life for 30 some years know that you don't find, you'd be hard pressed to find an advocate for liturgical worship in wonderful architectural spaces like we are the stewards of.
Yeah.
I'm a huge advocate of that. And when this all went down and we found out that we were going to be doing Zoom worship to continue church, I was a big naysayer. I was like, if this is going to be church, okay, thanks. It's been a good run. I'm done. And that was really kind of how I felt when I was terribly disappointed and really frustrated with the fact that which I've devoted my professional life to was really just coming to an end, and abruptly, almost as if somebody had shut off the light switch and by gosh, you're done. Thanks. It's been a good run. what has been actually surprising to me, and I think Kathy was kind of alluding to this too, is that there's a community nature of built in this Zoom community that we have found that in some ways we haven't even been able to tap into in-person worship in the past decade or so at Zion. We've had people come and join us for whatever reason who haven't been joining us in-person Sundays, whether that's because they're geographically not located in our area anymore, or their life situation is such that, man, it's just not a good idea to be at church, or it just didn't work for whatever reason. There's been a sense of community that I have come to enjoy through Zoom worship that is actually in many ways for me more vibrant than in-person worship. And I admit that my situation is kind of different because for most Sundays on in-person worship, I'm kind of a busy guy. I've got one or two things that go on during the context of worship, so I don't get to interact with that many people that way. But this whole concept of Zoom worship, I think, has been a real blessing for a lot of people, and it's borne out, interestingly enough, in some of our more elderly or more seasoned worshipers who haven't grown up with technology and who maybe even struggle to use things like technology, but pick up the phone week after week and will be the people who exclaim, boy, it's certainly good to be with you all today, just to hear your voice or just to be around other people. You know, they've been in their houses for 3 or 4 months now, and in some cases in care facilities where they literally can't go anywhere. And so that connection to Zion on a Sunday morning is a huge part of their week and a huge part of who they've become, and to be a part of that and to be the conduit for those people to interact with other people, I think is something we would not have enjoyed had we still been worshiping in person at church. That, together with the fact that what in-person worship is going to mean right now, at least at the moment, I struggle with that, even though I love to be in that room. I love to be in that space and be inspired by that architecture and by that art glass and by listening to an organ in a real space. There's nothing like that. There's nothing that compares with it, no matter how good we get at recording or providing technical support. There's no way that replaces the in-person experience of corporate worship. But my sense is right now that what we would be experiencing in that context is going to be something subpar to what we're having in Zoom worship at the moment.
Yeah, and we have quite a few folks who join us every week, or based on their schedules, are there for Zoom, and also some who watch the YouTube video after the fact. I mean, that's another option. So you're exactly right. I mean, I think that's the combined number right now on Zoom and YouTube is more than at least twice as more than we would expect to be able to gather with, both because of the limitations of the numbers and because of what we're hearing from folks that they're just not going to be able to come back right away. I mean, that's a substantially larger worshiping community than we're talking about in person. Right? Becky, we've been spending a lot of time here talking about the sort of the present moment and kind of looking to the short future. I want to ask you maybe a slightly longer future question, or something that we're hearing from folks. One of the phrases that's getting passed around here a lot is the concept of herd immunity, and of people who say, well, gosh, if we're all going to get this eventually anyway, why try so hard to prevent it? Or maybe those who are saying, I think we've already had it in our household, so surely we don't have to worry about this anymore. What would you say to that, Nurse Becky?
Well, for one thing, humans are not in herds, okay? We're not animals. But what that means is that you would pass it along. You wouldn't have any social or any restrictions in your country. Sweden actually tried that. They had very few restrictions, and their best percentage of immunity was 7%. You have to have at least 60 to 70% of immunity built when in order for herd to work. And in that case, you're looking at 4 to 5 years. And in the meantime, you're going to lose a lot of people. And a lot of people are going to get very, very ill and have bad outcomes.
I like that you added that last line, especially. I think I've started to hear more and more about, we've been so focused on the deaths that are the cost of COVID-19, that it has been easy to slip past the long-term health consequences from those who recover. And,
Right.
you know, that's, it's not because of lack of care for one another, but just because we're heartbroken when we lose someone. And so it's easy to kind of go past that. But I think you pick up on the fact that it's not, I mean, giving thanks that in your household, you know, there's been a full turnaround, but not everybody is experiencing that when they are diagnosed and come down with COVID. So, yeah, I'm glad that you say that. I mean, we're not heard, but also just that it can be easy to sort of say something like that without kind of imagining the cost that it involves. The cost to just generally to the community, but not only, I mean, think who all bears that cost, right? If we try to just sort of go there by trying to get people sick enough. I mean, that's just not a good strategy.
Right, because our police and our firefighters, the EMTs, the nurses, the doctors, if we're just all going to go out there and get it, they don't have a bubble around them when they're not in the hospital or behind all of their gear. And if we start to lose those people, we will be in a world of hurt.
Yeah.
Well,
amen.
And I think too, this is a great example of that. You know, this is a great fashion statement, and I'm really proud of my plaid mask. I really like it. It was custom built for me, actually. I really enjoy this. I do this not because I think I look cool, even though, P.S. I do. I don't do it for that way. I do it because I care for others, and I care for the people who are around me. And if it seems to me that in the life of a parish community, one of the first things we're called to do as Christian persons is to be in care of others, to look out for the welfare of others. Do unto others as you would do unto yourself. I remember that from someplace. It's an important concept. And so I think the very least that we can do as individual members of Zion Lutheran Church is to look out for each other as a parish, but also to look out, as Daphne suggested, to all those people in the community who are standing on the front lines of this event for all of us. It's our parish nurses. It's the people who work for Worcester Fire Department and Worcester Police Department. It's the people who work at Buehler's or Walmart or any place else who are out there trying to make sure that we can all still exist in a community. But it's our job as individual persons to really take that care, to take on that mantle of care for others. And so if we can show that consideration by maintaining social distancing, by always using a mask. Don't wait for the governor to tell you in Columbus you got to wear a mask, or in Cleveland you got to wear a mask. Wear a mask in Worcester, wear a mask in Shreve, wear a mask in Smithville. Every place you go when you're outside, you should just do that. Do that because you care about others around you, not because only it makes you look cool, like it makes me look cool.
I also wanted to point out, and the nurses, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but a mask right now at least prevents us from spitting on other people. But there are still aerosols that pass through those masks. Is that correct?
Except for an N95.
Right. And the majority of us do not have those.
Right. I actually did some research because I made a bunch of masks for the staff at Cleveland Clinic Worcester, and some friends. I made Steve an Ohio State mask, so he'd feel cool wearing it. But I've been doing research all along as to which masks are the most protective. And the last thing that I saw was a mask with cotton, close weave cotton, and 2 layers of chiffon fabric was much more protective than some of the other masks. And the other thing you need to do is have a really good seal around your face. Of course, us who are wearing glasses, that causes some issues where you start to steam up at times. But so some masks offer a little bit more protection to us, but a lot of people may have seen the things where they show someone with COVID not wearing a mask and a person with without COVID wearing a mask, and it talks about how much of a percentage of protection. I think it's around like 5% or something. And it goes down, and when both of them are wearing masks, it's like 90% effective. So it really makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I realize that there's going to be some people out there that have all kinds of political ideas as to their rights and why they're not going to wear a mask. We're not going to change their opinion. I just want them to stay away from me and my family.
I agree.
Yeah. I mean, that is one of the things that is true about it. Whenever we get back to worship, right, that's going to be a masked zone, you know, that because of what you just said, because the folks who are coming have decided to try, whenever this happens, have decided to try to come to in-person worship, whatever it might look like, because we have told them that everybody there will be wearing a mask, right? And so we have to make sure that really is true, that they're not, that they don't find that that's not true when they get there. That's completely unfair to them, because they've made that choice based on what we've told them is what we're doing to do as much protection and safety as we can in terms of distancing, in terms of, we didn't even mention the fact that worship will be shorter when we are in person for that same reason, right? Because length of time is a contributing factor. So that's, you know, all of those things are things that we will be doing in order to try to protect everyone who comes. Nothing is 100%. Nothing is, we cannot guarantee 100% safety. But we are doing everything we can to minimize the risks. And that means people do need to wear a mask if they come to worship.
Jeff, do you want to model your mask of the proper and the improper way of wearing a mask?
Oh, certainly, Kathy, I'd be happy to. So this is the proper way. So you have to cover everything, including your nose, especially those of us with significant noses, and those of us who wear glasses. I get a little fog from this, but so far I can still see you all. This is not an acceptable way to wear your mask. This is not an acceptable way to wear your mask. So just keep your mouth and your nose covered, and if you need a nice fashion statement, people like Kathy and Becky can help you know where to find those really great statements.
That's great.
Thank you.
I will say, I don't know if this is a good idea, but when I put my mask on, I move my glasses just a tiny bit down my nose, and that prevents the fog, for one thing, and it also helps to secure the top of the mask. It helps to make it seal even more.
And I'm used to Daphne looking at me like this anyway. So.
One of the things that people have talked about is they have said that people with lung problems, with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, may have difficulty breathing if they wear a mask. We understand that, but those people probably should not be out in public, and definitely not at a worship service anyway. So, you know, they're basically, if you can't wear a mask for some reason, you just shouldn't be out in public.
Yeah. I want to jump in here just briefly and show again the, I want to go a little bit farther here. We talked a little bit about the ages, and Becky or Kathy, this wasn't on one of the things we initially talked about, but we have heard that more younger people are now being diagnosed. I don't know if either one of you wants to talk about what what that might mean for us or anything else about that. But also that while there is a higher number of infection rate in younger folks, this I think goes back to Kathy, maybe what you said earlier, which is that the seriousness of the illness, though, is still especially true of those who are older or who have other complicating factors. This was just an add-on. Anybody want to talk about that sort of younger?
I was going to say something about it as if you look at the state of Florida, and they opened up all their beaches and they opened up all their restaurants, just basically opened up. Yes, the younger people got it, not as bad. Yes, the younger people ended up being carriers to the older people. And at this point, there are at least 5 hospitals that the ICU and their maximum capacity, their capacity is at maximum. So, I mean, it shows that. Look at the big cities. Look at Cincinnati, Columbus, Cleveland, all that. They have it just skyrocketed when things got opened up a little more than probably it should have been.
Yeah. I want to echo what Daphne said, which also then about what you just said, Becky, means that all of those folks that are, the staff of that hospital, their families, those all are also bearing the cost of that, with increased risk as they have to increase. Also, if you've got a loved one who needs an ICU for other reasons, that's
right.
That's an additional challenge. So,
and people are afraid to go to the ER.
Yeah.
They may be having a heart attack and they're not going to go because they think they're going to get COVID, and then they don't get the proper care that they need.
I quickly looked up the number of healthcare worker deaths due to COVID, and as of June 6th, 600 healthcare workers have died because of COVID.
Wow.
So as these younger people are going out, or I read about, was it in Atlanta, where they were having COVID parties, they just don't even begin to think about the impact on other people.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that is a sobering note, and I think something that we all have to take to heart, right? That cost, that human cost. I do want to sort of nudge us to a little bit of a hopeful ending here as we're getting close, which is we've had these conversations, we've talked about, and necessarily so, about all the things we really cannot do right now as a result of COVID. What are some things we can do? What are some things that we can do safely during the pandemic? How would you encourage people to spend their days, or their time, if they have leisure time, or if they have other time? What are some things we can do in the midst of this?
Some of the people that have been on Zoom have seen our beagle Lucy when she jumps on the couch or bed behind me. And Lucy gets a lot of walks these days. And we live in a condo community. And what's great is a lot of the people are older and they're sitting in their driveways or on their patios. And, we're 15 feet away from them walking in the street, and we can say hi and have a little bit of a conversation, and it brightens my day. It brightens Ron's day, the person we're saying hi to. So we've been doing a lot of walking and enjoying the sunshine, except when it's 90 degrees outside.
Right.
One of the things that you can do and really enjoy is come to Zoom worship at Zion Lutheran Church. And I say that sort of tongue in cheek as a staff member here, but I'll also tell you that I've had a lot of people, parishioners and even colleagues and friends of mine who have tuned in to see what in the heck is Dexter doing now, to really have a sense of energy and buoyancy to your week. Just being together communally like that, and listening to the word and hearing some music and seeing all those faces and seeing whether Lucy does show up or not on Sunday morning it was a little more interesting when Henry would show up and he would be the guest of honor. But you know, that we can work with that.
Lucy's not as exciting as Henry. And
Yeah.
speaking of that, one of the greatest things was the day that Nicole Nolt showed her newborn baby on Zoom.
Yep.
It was very exciting.
And
Yeah.
that wouldn't have happened in person.
Mm-mm.
So yeah, come to church.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
here.
I agree with you. What I was going to say is Kathy and Ron and Steve and I are very good friends, which I think most of you know. And we've really missed our time together. So we pick a restaurant, we get our food, and we sit in the cars so that we're far enough apart, and we spend a good hour, at least, huh, Kathy? We eat together, and we socialize, and we're safe.
That's great. That's awesome.
And then we walk away feeling, or drive away feeling much lighter hearted.
Yeah.
The other thing is they're saying that people can swim, people can be outdoors, they can hike. They just need to distance themselves from other people. Every article that I've read lately has talked about, they really, really think that the risk in outdoor activities is very low. The wind, as that article that I was reading little excerpts from, they said being outside, any amount of wind blows that cloud of aerosolization away. So as we walk around neighborhoods and that, I have seen so many pools in people's backyards. And you can go to the beach as long as you're distance from people. Or like one of the articles I was reading said, you can go to a pool, just don't use the locker room. Take your own stuff, sit in a chair, bring your own chair, sit in it, that you're socially distanced from everyone else. I know I've seen some pools who are taking reservations that only so many people can be there. So you can do it safely, but you really have to follow the rules.
Yeah.
You could
Our
go
children
to
got
the
it.
zoo.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Right. One of the things I've been seeing is how, like, in some ways the animals are missing us, right? I mean,
Yes.
they need to have their own distractions because they're not used to not having people there. So, you know, it's good for you,
Aw.
it's good for them too.
Our children got us to go kayaking with them.
Yes.
Now, what I want you to picture is this in an inflatable kayak. It was quite the sight. It was quite the sight.
Daphne, I've seen you. I mean, you guys have had some beach time, which seemed really restorative and renewing, and kind of helped to kind of, I don't know, take a deep breath in some sort of metaphorical way, a spiritual way as well. But also, I've seen pictures of you outside with some gardening and some growing things. I would think that also is a really good thing for this time.
It is. Early on, even in March, we had a relatively warm March, and our neighbors across the street had their mulch delivered, and they were out then. And there were numerous neighbors that were out doing landscaping work already. And we have a lot of walkers in our neighborhood as well. We have 4 to 6 ladies, the Presbyterian ladies, we refer to them as, and they form 2 rows and spread out across the street and walk every morning. But I feel like the neighborhood has gotten closer because so many people have gone out to walk and just get out, and it's a chance to greet other people and know that you're not alone in dealing with all of this. I also wanted to point out that Zion has 2 large parking lots. And I remember when we were first told to stay at home, that we would see groups of people in a circle in the Movies 10 parking lot because it had been closed, just sharing coffee and talking across these long, wide circles. And there's no reason, you know, Pastor Sherry or Jeff and I do not need to convene a meeting for something to happen in one of Zion's parking lots. So if you have a group of friends you've been missing from church, pick a night, set your time, and set up a big, large circle with your own camp chairs and talk with one another. I mean, outside, that's great.
That's great.
The other thing a lot of people are doing is a lot of people are going to cabins or Airbnbs. We actually have an Airbnb that we have reserved in August that we're going with our daughter, Heather, Henry, and George. And the owner is specifically leaving 3 days between all of the renters so that there's no problem with COVID. After 3 days, anything on the surfaces should be killed. And it's a remote farmhouse in Virginia, but it's on the Rappahannock River, and they have their own private beach on the river.
Wow.
So we're going to be able,
Nice.
totally distanced from everyone. And actually, my daughter Holly, who lives in DC, said she can't even find an Airbnb to rent because everyone is doing the same thing because it's a safe practice.
Right.
It's safer than a hotel.
Everything that's been offered here has sort of suggested that a little bit of patience with yourself and a little bit of creativity, and there are ways to find that spiritual and family and kind of mental health inducing release and opportunities. You've lifted up so many, and we probably could have made this. If we wanted to do volume 2 of this guide, we could probably spend a whole volume talking about ways that we have found. I've done Zoom and FaceTime, cocktail hours, happy hours, and coffee with friends and family. And many of them, this is sort of gets to what we've talked about the Zoom circumstance as well, the Zoom church opportunity as well. I've spent more time having connections with cousins and friends that I haven't seen in a while than I would have probably if this didn't ever happen, right? It's been there have been those moments of positivity in this, and we just want to help them continue. Well, I think we're getting close to our time here. I want to thank again all of you for being willing to be a part of this. I want to show this image today. Some of you will recognize one of the things that Zion did in February was this kind of timeline, which is a part of the call process, was kind of telling stories about the history of where Zion had been, and that leading then to the call committee and others kind of envisioning the future of Zion. And I just want to say that, the COVID era, someday the COVID era is going to be a Post-it note, probably a pretty big one, on this table, right? It's going to be one of those other things that have been a significant part of the history of Zion. But what we are in the place of doing right now is trying to figure out how that story will be told. Will it be told as a way of the creative things that the community did and the ways they came together and the ways they found to support one another and to care for their neighbors and to be resilient and creative in the midst of that? That's I think the reality we're trying to live into. We definitely want, at the end of this, whenever that is, whenever a treatment, whenever a vaccine is available, whenever we're in a new space and the gathering, we want all the same faces around that table. We want everyone to be able to gather there. And we want the Post-it note at the other end to talk about what we did in order to make that happen. And so I think that is, for me, a significant piece of what the reentry team and all of you and all of the others have been doing, which is to try to ensure as much as possible that the whole community is supported and gathered and experiences the presence of Christ in their midst, in the midst of worship and in the midst of caring for one another, and finds ourselves collectively at the other side of this with everyone whole and healthy and able to come back to worship. So I thank you all for all of the work that you have been doing to help to ensure that that is true as well. For many of you who'd like to know a little bit more, we have several wonderful links and bits of information that the committee weighed and felt like were very valuable in the course of this work. I think that's all I have. Any other parting thoughts?
I guess I would say to people from our parish who happen to be watching this video, if the information that you've received today and some of the things that you've heard today causes you to have a question or or you'd like a little bit more information, hey, reach out to any of the people you see on the screen here. There's various ways in which you can get in contact with all of us. We look sort of like the Brady Bunch or the Hollywood Squares, but we'd be happy to try and help you and support you in trying to find additional resources. There is a bombardment of information out there. It's good to have a filter. It's good to be thoughtful, and we would be more than happy to help you sort of traverse through those through all of that sea of information that's coming at us. But there is no one answer. But one of the things that's impressed me about this group of people that we've collected is they've been so purposeful and so helpful of others in this whole process that I think if there's any way we can help you in an additional way, don't hesitate to ask us.
Absolutely.
Amen to that. Well, it has been wonderful to see you all. I wish you well on the rest of your day, and blessings to those of you who may be watching this later. Here's mine. This one is out of a T-shirt.
Cool.
Oh, Becky,
Cool.
you have to show your lion one.
Lions Club.
Oh, you have a
Or
lion?
Oh, lion. All right. On volume 2, we will all show off all of our new masks.
Very good.
Great. Have a wonderful
Goodbye.
day, you all. Blessings.